What I would ask, when you ask the panelists questions, there's going to be some specific things. You may have a question for Annie on regulatory clarification. That's fine. I was saying earlier, this isn't free consulting time for your individual enterprise. So please ask questions that everybody can kind of contribute to for the good of this community that we're building to understand better what's happening in the industry. And if we get too detailed, I may say, let's do that offline. So does anybody have an opening question? Am I going to bring mics to people, or you got that? Yep.
I'll just say we do have the room past 3 o'clock, and we can continue on. Anybody needs to leave when we get to that.
Okay, we'll give you the 3 o'clock. I was aiming for 3:30. Is everybody good with 3:30? Does anybody? For everybody. So we're gonna be here till 3:30. Anybody can leave at 3 if they need to. So does anybody have any questions? Just raise your hand. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Claire Crunk with Southeast Hemp Fiber. I have 2 comments and a question. So my first comment is, as a fiber gal, everything that you guys have said about CBD applies to the fiber industry. So I field a lot of calls with folks interested in changing over to fiber, but there is no open market for fiber. There's no spot pricing. It's very similar to CBD. So don't believe in sunshine and rainbows there. The second comment I have is, and you guys have talked about this, about the need for capital for processors. That is a huge problem we're facing in the fiber world. So that's why I'm here today. I want to recruit growing partners and folks who might be interested in buying in and being an equity partner. Question. And this is about fiber. When we're talking about USDA regulations and testing methodology and requirement, we were very lucky in Tennessee to have THC testing requirement dropped from fiber grows. I'm wondering, for Eric and Annie, is there any voice for fiber groups in lobbying for THC testing? Because a lot of times inherently those genetics are so low, it's negligible anyways. Do you see a path where maybe one day we don't have to do THC testing for fiber?
We still require THC testing for fiber.
Ooh, oh, well then my agent told me wrong.
Okay.
Well, he said I didn't have to.
Okay. So there was maybe some bad information there. I mean, the fiber varieties, if you're not using it for that, maybe we can get there. That's not a bad goal that we could eventually get there, but I think the Farm Bill does require testing for all crops, regardless of whether it's what the purpose is that you're growing it for. I think it's, the fiber piece is the hardest one. We've seen it in other markets. For example, in Canada, they've been growing for over 20 years. They've tried to get fiber off the ground multiple times. Different companies have come in. There are some people that are doing it, but it's still sort of what I would call pilot scale. There's no major fiber processing facility. And I think it's going to take a major industrial concern. It's probably, a $20 million investment, or I don't know, maybe you can do it for less. 10 and a half, maybe you need some working capital, and you add it all up, the cycle for production and everything. But in any case, it's millions of dollars. That's the challenge. And when somebody commits to that, then you've got to have farmers within say a 50-mile radius or even less that are willing to grow thousands of acres of the crop to provide that consistent supply, because transportation is very much a factor there. I was at an event in Danville on Monday. There was a guy there who was working on this in North Carolina. I think they bought 200 acres worth of fiber from some farmers. I think they were paying about 8 cents a pound. That's just a general, sort of point of reference there for you. I mean, I don't know what the market's going to look like, but that could be, so it could be interesting. And where I think it could really get interesting is if we get into a dual crop potential, to be able to grow a grain crop, let's say, where you could combine it, take the seed off of it, and then come back and pull the fiber and then sell it as an additional stream. Maybe not. Yeah.
Yep.
I will speak to this. This isn't specific to fiber, but it does have some ramifications there. Is basic economic principles still hold for this crop. So if you want to have a discussion about niche markets, this is separate from what I'm going to say. But if you're going to have a long-term, large-scale, viable market, the product has to do one of 3 things. It has to fill a need that is not being met by an existing product. It's got to have a quality that is superior to other products in the market, or it has to have a cheaper price. If one of those 3 things do not apply, the long-term stability of that market is questionable, to say the least. And so again, I'm not saying that there's not markets here, but the same basic economic principles do apply in terms of large-scale industrial production. If you're looking at niche markets, that is a different conversation, because there you're trying to differentiate the product and extract a price premium. Those are not the same things. So again, that's not specific to fiber, that's specific to anything. It has to end up holding one of those three characteristics if it's going to have staying power in terms of a large-scale market.
I'm going to make one comment about this. This is my first hemp presentation in 20 years, but one thing I would add to everybody that's presented, you're speaking to this, in our view, taking a step back, these are three completely distinct crops. Fiber, which you mentioned Canada, it was great in southern Ontario. It did the things we said it would, rotate with soy and wheat and corn. It was fantastic. Low margin business. You could benchmark that business against any other fiber. We're a big hardwood place here, softwood pulp, and kind of figure out where you fit in that. Treat it that way. Oil seeds, you can index, probably harvest with a combine. You could index that to something like flaxseed oil, other high omega, oils, and figure out, is it a 40,000 acre market, is a 50, and then what we've kind of talked about mainly today, CBD, which is a distinctly indifferent. So that's the bias that we have, that I have in this, and until we kind of look at each one of those very distinctly, this is going to be pretty hard. Another thing I will throw into the conversation is this dual market thing. We haven't done it. I mean, we've tried with corn to take husk and stover, unless there's some other reason to do it, like in the South, it doesn't degrade because it doesn't get so cold. I mean, during this, we have excess biomass we need to get out of the field. Unless there's a driver for the dual market, it is very, very hard to do that. So, just putting that into the conversation. Yeah, and that wasn't a question either. We're starting off with me and you making comments, but love to hear what you have to say on that. Yeah, oh, here you go. That's good for me to actually have to give up the mic there.
Yes, and the only thing I was going to add is Phytronics is a genetics provider out of Oregon. They just announced they're going to be trying a tri-crop, which would be your colas at the top for CBD. It would be grain and then fiber. So you would come through first, cut your tops for CBD production, get the grain, then your fiber would be next. So they're doing trials. If anybody's interested, you might want to look up Phytronics. That's with a PHY.
And that's a good point. I think we could all say a dual crop, something's going to have to lead with the value, right? That's going to take precedent when we harvest, how we harvest it. These are biological systems. But if you could capture value out of multiple things, but one's got to lead the way, right? Yeah.
The seed producer that I mentioned in far western Kentucky is doing just that, but he leads with his seed production. He's a certified seed producer for fiber varieties, and he's somewhere around just short of 2,000 acres of seed, and he has to get that fiber off the field anyway. And so in order to get it off the field and sell it to the hardwood flooring industry, he round bales it essentially so that he sells it for somewhere around 20 cents a pound, something like that. But had he not led with that, and he's actually collecting some floral material for extraction as well, but the value is in the seed, but that opportunity is fairly limited.
Questions?
My name's John Allen. I'm from here. My question's for the Murray State professor. Halogen wasn't it labeled in Kentucky for the use of the biological for worm control?
Yeah, and there were a few different ones that were labeled as used as a biological for some of the budworm control. Yeah.
Did you have a lot to do with that in your research? And
No, actually, so the worm control, it came on late in this past growing season whenever we realized it was such a problem. Honestly, I hadn't seen a lot of that worm pressure, and Samantha may have seen before that, but this year was really whenever it came on strong. And so what we did, we can do some things as a university that you can't do as a grower. As a matter of fact, we can do about anything we want to with this plant as a university. We just crop destruct whenever it's over. And we're not trying to sell anything. And so we tested dipel, was what we used, and it worked great. But of course, it's not labeled. But we did test some biologicals, but primarily for mold control. So I don't have a lot of experience with that product.
Okay, I got one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Every photograph of a hemp field up here is in very light, sandy dirt. I had it in heavier dirt this year. Would you recommend a different fertility program, or do you think it's all about the same?
I know you looked for Dr. Parr, but I was one of his students at one point. Okay, so there would be differences. A lot of the photos that I posted up there, those are in Central Kentucky. We've got some pretty heavy clay soils as well too. The University of Kentucky does have a good nutrient recommendation. I'd be happy to share it with you after we get done here. Find me and I'll send you the link to it. With the worm issue, I only see it getting worse. In all honesty, I was out in fields this summer and was just pulling them out of the buds, and by the multitude. Okay, so we know that if we don't control it now, it is only going to get worse. I do know a few people that use the dipel had mixed results from it. There were some folks, some contracts that were telling them to spray garlic on their fields too. That worked even less. If you can imagine, it just made it smell like garlic. So, but yeah, be happy to share those recommendations with you after this. But yeah, we raise it in clay-based soil in Central Eastern Kentucky. It's heavy soil too. So,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Parr.
Other questions? Yes.
Just want to say I went to the Ag Launch event last night, and there was a company that had a new technology, or as a natural way to deal with the worms. Boyd, do you know the name of them?
Next.
Lepidex. So anyways, just something as another alternative for people to potentially look at.
Great. Thank you.
And we're looking to do some trials with them on that this year at the Agri Center, and maybe with folks in Kentucky as well.
What are the questions? If you're in this, you want me to ask one? Everybody? All right, so you guys all have a nice big fat checkbook, and you're going to invest in something in the space with what you're looking at now with the markets. What would you do? Who wants to go first? Eric, you can go.
Yeah, what would I invest in first? Picks and shovels. That's my answer. I think that's right now, especially where we are in the industry, providing services and things to support the industry, genetics, whatever. I mean, I think that's what I'd do.
As a regulatory official, I don't think I can answer that.
From my perspective, I would say, to piggyback off of Eric's picks and shovels, it is, here's who's making money. Let me say it this way. Anybody who's selling seeds and genetics, they're making it hand over foot, because regardless of the market, they're making money. And then it's your ancillary services that are making the money. Yeah.
I'd say large-scale harvesting, drying equipment, still a huge problem. We've seen a few work, but they're still terribly inefficient. So it's, in order to do this, I mean, we most of ours in far western Kentucky was silage chopped this year. When you have 700 acres, silage chopped was about the only option. But it's silage chopped and then baled with stationary balers that Sam might have said didn't have a figure on the balers, but the ones that I know of range from $200,000 to $480,000 per baler. There's got to be a better way, and then it's got all the woody material in it that has to be separated before extraction. So that piece of it alone puts so much money into the process that it makes 75-cent hemp hard to live with. But investing in that and seeing that brought down to a manageable level could be the difference between make or break.
As a producer, storage, and also the production of clones in greenhouses, especially those folks that do have float bed greenhouses from tobacco production. And of course, as a university employee, I feel like I have to say research too. I think Eric mentioned we lost 60 years of research. We have a lot to still learn. There's a lot of really great work being made, but of course, there's still more to learn.
Well, as the economist, I probably wouldn't invest in it right now. That's because I'm tremendously risk averse. Now, if I had a time machine, I will say that where we did see some profitability was in the clone or transplant propagation. So again, I still think that we do need research. I think that's where some dollars need to be spent. And then genetics, I think, is if you can control that genetics, I think that's where you're going to see the greatest long-run potential given what we know right now.
Somebody else had another question. I got plenty. So if everybody's entertained, we'll keep going. Should we keep going? Okay. So, oh, yes, sir. We can use this. Okay. Can you use your mic just to make sure everybody can hear you?
We're in the bag business. We're here in Memphis, and we can make and do make bulk bags and all kinds of bags for your storage problem. So we're Langston Bag Company. We've got a booth. Welcome to come see us.
Great. Good pitch. Anybody have a question? Okay, sorry.
So no one's mentioned the other minor cannabinoids, CBG, CBN, genetics. What are your thoughts on those?
Let's see if it, yeah. A couple thoughts on that. One, I'm actually working with a small batch processor in Nashville right now that's making a CBG. Actually, my mom is already using a CBG tincture. Just with the effects of being more focused and everything, I'm like, let's try this. So, one, I think long term, we're getting ready to see CBN come out next. CBC is going to be after that. We're going to see over the next few years, with all the change, multiple cannabinoids being researched, brought to market. One thing I would caution you at, and this was probably our December meeting, TNHIA up in Nashville, and one of the farmers said to me, well, I guess next year we just need to grow CBG. And I paused, thought for a minute. I said, but if we do, we'll all be in the same boat we are now. So that's my thought on that. You still just got to, really understand the market. And the other call out I will make is extraction companies are still turning that on as far as what the end products will look like. And so it's all market driven.
That was a good question. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Oh, Eric, you want to give any thoughts?
I mean, my only thought is just that it's going to take time for those other markets to develop. I don't think there's much consumer demand yet for CBG. There's a lot of buzz around it, and I think there's potential, but it's going to take a lot of marketing to get there.
In addition to that, yes, I think markets are going to drive that, but I think the FDA and the regulatory process is really going to have to kind of evolve a little bit. And then on top of that, there's going to have to be some understanding by the consumer about what some of those other extracts potentially are, what they can potentially end up doing. Because right now, I don't think we necessarily have a level of sophistication to be able to end up having general consumers identify those specific products and how you would potentially end up paying for that. But the big thing to me that's going to really drive that is the regulatory environment. I think that's one where I think there's going to have to be some guidance on that to see how we can end up treating each of these different extracts, this basket of extracts differently.
What Aaron was just talking about made me think about, to me, if we holding everything else constant or static, we got USDA, FDA, To me, the biggest opportunity that's going to build this marketplace is once we have a discerning consumer, because there's so much variation that we've all heard as far as the quality. When the more education that we can get out there in the marketplace, then we got an educated consumer. But when they become discerning of saying, I want A versus B, that's going to drive a lot of the garbage out of the market, and then we're going to have a more viable marketplace.
What else?
Some questions in the back there.
You got it, Rebecca?
Hey. I'm curious, why do you think there's such a shortage in labs, testing labs?
Well, so if you're talking about DEA registered labs, there seems to be a shortage on those. From what I know, I'm not sure if there's a shortage generally on labs. Does anybody, Annie, what do you think here in Tennessee?
I think it's just the DEA registered labs. When people say shortage, that's what they're talking about right now.
And one thing to even note on that, even when we say DEA certified lab, pretty much we got labs all over the country that's been testing for years. If a non-certified lab gets a hot crop, that's marijuana. If it's hemp, it's considered marijuana. So really that designation just says that they are certified to handle that crop on behalf of the DEA.
Yeah, it's Scott Fullen. We talk about the cheap price of 50 cents and all that, but when I look at it as a cotton, corn, and soybean farmer, that's still a lot of money per acre. It looks like to me where the problem is, we've got to get our expenses down per acre to do this. And then it's still, even if you take the 50 cents and cut it in half, your dollars per acre, its potential there is compared to some of the other crops to fit in our system of what we grow in the future. Is that a correct statement, I guess?
I'll take that one, yes. Totally agree. One of the big challenges that we're going to have in that is we're back to true cultivation. To give you an example, we grew our crop next to an adjacent cornfield. We had already planted. We started planting it June 3rd. A couple weeks later, the adjacent farmer came out, planted his corn. We didn't see him it was months before we saw him again. Our guys were out there every day. It's the labor intensive part that we're really going to have to figure out how to handle cultivating this crop and still maintaining the quality, because it's not ditchweed, so you can't just put it out there and come back 6, 7, 8 weeks later and get ready to harvest it. So that's, to me, where some of the opportunities, where we did spend some of our investment this year, was trying to cut off the edges or the ends, the bookends of that. We went out and bought a CBD harvester that can, we went with Formation Ag's 15-foot harvester that will do 7 acres an hour. So but then, I was telling the team, even when we were doing that, we're going to have to start going in and figuring out ways to minimize that labor cost, because the biggest two costs we had was labor and transportation.
Scott, correct?